Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the development sessions. I'm Stephanie Russell, and I am the Economic Development Manager for Georgia Municipal Association. We have a special program for you today. We're so excited. We have our guest speaker today, Jim Lovett, and Jim Lovett is going to be talking about development incentives in your community and the value of doing development incentives in your community. Before we get fully started, I wanted to let you know that we do have the chat and the Q&A open. We'll be monitoring that, and Jim would love for you to ask questions during his presentation today. So feel free to drop your questions, comments in the chat, and we'll address those as the presentation is flowing. So just a quick introduction about Jim. In Georgia's West region, you'll find Jim serving as the Community and Economic Development Manager for Georgia Power. He supports growth in the local communities through leadership development, strategic planning, existing industry retention and expansions, and with new companies considering an expansion or relocation to the area. Jim also works with the Georgia Academy for Economic Development and provides economic development and leadership training. Jim's career with Georgia Power began in 1982. He has worked in many areas of the company, including region operations, finance, corporate services, and legislative affairs. Jim earned a bachelor's degree in finance from the University of Georgia and a master's degree in finance from Georgia State University. He also is a certified economic development financial professional by the National Development Council. And Jim serves on the board of directors of the Georgia Agribusiness Council and is a member of the Georgia Economic Developers Association. Jim, welcome so much to our development sessions, and take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let's see if we can share. So Stephanie or Cindy or Chris, give me a thumbs up or something, or if you can you see my screen? Okay, good deal. All right, let's jump right in. So, this is a similar presentation that I do for Development Authority training programs a few times a year. And I've tried to modify or change this a little bit that's hopefully more appropriate for you working to improve your downtowns. But you'll see as we go through, a lot of it is maybe more geared toward industrial projects and industrial development. So some of the common local incentives that are available to your development authorities, your downtown development authorities to use to land new businesses, to bring jobs and investment to your downtowns. Here, this is not a comprehensive list, but these are some of the more common incentives that you can use. You can do cash grants. Many of you probably have some type of facade grant or storefront improvement grant program in place. The common approach is to require matching funds from the small business owner or building owner. And that can be anywhere from 1 to 1, 2 to 1, however you want to structure that. What works for your community may not apply to other communities. You can do, for industrial projects, industrial authorities that control property can do free or reduced price on land. If you're fortunate enough to own buildings, you can try to land a business in that building by offering free, graduated, or reduced rent for some period of time. I want to talk just briefly, these are some investments that you can make to solve some weaknesses or solutions that you need to be working on before you're actually working a specific business or project. And those are things like sidewalk improvements, streetscape improvements, parking improvements. And then I'm also going to talk very, very briefly about tax abatements. Now, I will tell you, because we get this question pretty frequently, especially with smaller communities or even with larger downtowns. They want to try to look at doing some type of tax savings or property tax abatement on new investment to help a business get started. And it's really difficult to do unless you're talking about a very large capital investment. Said another way, I'll just kind of give you an example. If you're working with a small business and they're going to invest $1 million, that's a lot of money, $1 million in your downtown, and it's in real property where there's no depreciation involved. That $1 million multiplied times your 40% assessment ratio, $400,000. If your city had a 6 mil, just for my illustration, that's only $2,400 annually due in property taxes. And so while you say, well, if we could offer 100% abatement, that would save in $2,400 in the first couple of years. The problem is to make all this legal, you're going to be required to do a bonds for title transaction, and there's some transaction costs associated with that. And the rule of thumb is, no one's going to pay $10, $20, $30,000 in transaction costs to save $2,400 a year. So I guess the takeaway is it's going to need to be a large investment, usually $10 million or more, or you're going to need to be able to save them, somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000 or more in the first year alone in property taxes. So that may not apply for many projects that you work with. It's more geared toward the industrial projects. So those are some common incentives. Now, before I leave that, those of you that can annotate, if you'll go up to, let's see, at the top of my screen, it may be at the bottom of yours, and move your mouse to the green ribbon, and you'll see an option to annotate. And if you click on the annotate option, you can either take the stamp, which is a check mark, or select any of the annotation options or tools there. If you'll put a mark, if your development authority or your city has used any of these types of incentives previously. And if you don't know, that's okay. And if you're on an iPad, you may not be able to annotate. If you want to just put a description in the chat that yes, we use one of these and which one it is, that's fine too. I'm going to give you just 1 minute to annotate if you've used any of these in the past. Okay, not seen anything. Well, I hope this is we're gonna improve as we go. I want to say, I want to tell you one quick story on the free building example. And I bet some of you have, okay, I'm seeing something come up now. I bet some of you have an issue where you have a building in your downtown, it's vacant, the owner of the building is absentee, and in this example I'm going to use, the owners were deceased, the building was left to the children who were all adults now and in different towns and had not been back to this town in Georgia in many, many years. And the building was in a great location, and much of the downtown had been improved or restored or developed around it. And it was sort of an eyesore, and the family had a lot of stuff. Some people would refer to it as junk stored in the facility. And, it was kind of like prayer. We probably need to do more of that daily, but the downtown development director would not stop reaching out to the children and finally was able to get a rapport and conversation with 2 of them and learn that their critical needs in this case were really that they didn't really care about the building, and they didn't care so much about the stuff in it. It had sentimental value, but they just didn't want to deal with it, and they weren't going to get rid of it. And so the solution that the parties went along with is this development authority acquired a building a number of blocks away, also in disrepair, and said, look, we'll rent this building to you for a nominal fee forever, as long as you want. And we will move your parents' stuff. We will carefully pack and move the stuff if you will donate this property to us. And that was a solution that worked. And so it was quite an incentive. And I thought it was just a bulldog example of how you have to deal with absentee landowners to improve vacant buildings in your town. Let me clear.
Hey, Jim, I want to let you know that some of our chat folks, some folks can use the annotation and some can't. So some folks were talking about that they use facade grants. Some people said site prep. Some folks said tax abatements.
Wow, okay, great.
So you have a lot of folks, and facade incentive program, we have another one on that one. So just wanted to let you know.
Thank you, perfect. So let's talk about some maybe less common and what I refer to as creative local incentives. So as a city authority, you can work with your city, P&Z or whatever the appropriate organization is. And if you're trying to recruit a new business and they're going to do some modifications, they're going to be faced with construction or permitting fees. They're going to potentially be faced with water and sewer utility extension cost. If your city's in the gas business, maybe gas extension or improvement cost. And these can add up. And you can take the approach that you can work with your city and waive or reduce some of these normal fees. One thing that's really creative that I've seen a city do one time is, this particular city was providing gas out to the industrial area. They didn't have any customers yet in the park. And when they landed the first tenant, they realized they didn't have really an industrial gas rate. Their rates were all for residential and commercial. And they learned that if they used their standard commercial rate based on the volume of gas this customer was going to use, they really were not, they were out of market pricing. The industrial customer said, look, you're like 3 to 4 times higher than these other two communities we're looking at. And the city council quickly got together and structured an industrial rate, which would apply to all industrial users using that volume of gas. Occupation tax caps. Many cities have an occupation tax requirement that's based on the number of employees. You're able to cap that at a certain number, maybe at 50 or 100 if you had a larger company or organization in your town and they were going to expand and grow. You could waive those occupation taxes for the additional employees that were created. That's an incentive that's available to you. Free office space. If a business is going to move in from another area and they're going to build a new facility in your town, they may need some office space to work during that construction period. Relocation assistance if key employees needed to be moved. Something really valuable for projects that are, especially these foreign direct investment projects. We refer to it as concierge services. We were fortunate enough to locate just a couple of years ago a company from Germany, and they moved 4 key employees over, both during construction and to do training and get the plant up running. Two of the families are still here, but they didn't know that based on where they chose to live, that would impact which schools their kids were going to be in school. They didn't know how to get a driver's license, how to get car insurance. So they actually had somebody hold their hand and walk them through a lot of livability issues. And that commitment on the front end was really a very valuable incentive to this company. And lastly, with one thing we've learned during the pandemic is a lot of companies aren't going to go back to business as normal. A lot of employees will continue to work remotely, or at least some of the time work remotely. And at least a number of communities have put programs in place to offer incentives that if you will move to our town and you're able to work remotely, we will give an incentive. It's a nominal amount. It's not much. Savannah's doing one and they're just offering $2,000. Columbus is working on something where it's not just move to Columbus, it's start a business. If you move and start a business, they're going to offer $10,000 grants. Is what they're talking about now. So let me go back. Let's try to annotate or use the chat again. How many of you have used any of these particular incentives to bring jobs and investment to your town? Excellent. Cindy, do we have anything else in the chat, or Stephanie, anything else in the chat there?
Yeah, right now I see concierge services, waiver of construction or permit fees. And I will say this for all of our participants, if you would, Stephanie, if you look at your chat box, she gives you kind of a step, how to get to the annotate, to click view options and how to do that. So if you're having problems, let us know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so, usually when I do this, I like to say, if you put these 2 pages of incentives on one piece of paper, and, you're working with a new business that's looking to potentially land in your community. And if you put that list in front of them and say, which one of these do you need? We joke about it. Most all industrial projects say, is that all? We need every one of those and more. So incentives usually, they shouldn't be that important. We want to use them prudently and use them to make a good deal better. So how do we know what's needed? Well, we're going to ask. We're not going to show some comprehensive list that we're able to do. And we want to try to match, determine what's most critical to locate the project in your community. And let's see how we can structure our incentives offer to meet the needs, meaning you don't want to do tax abatements if tax abatements aren't what they need. If they need some help getting started with some deferral of upfront costs, that's where you need to focus. And, what's needed to close this deal, and let's determine if we can afford it before we make an offer. I cannot tell you in the heat of negotiations how many communities have called us and said, hey, we're going to land this deal. We're going to close the deal with this project. Here's the offer we made. The company's indicated they're going to take it. Will you do an analysis and tell us how rich we're going to be? Or will you tell us, how positive is this? And, I've seen several of them where we didn't even have to do the analysis. This is not really arbitrary. This is kind of a real world example. If somebody was going to give away $6 million worth of land and no taxes for 5 years, and they had some other waivers and things in there, I said, you're not going to be surprised when you see that this is negative, right? Meaning the cost of the incentives was going to outweigh the overall benefits of the project. And they said, no, we can't have that. Well, you've got to let us help you with the analysis before you make the offer. And lastly, whatever you do, then begin to, or decide you want to do, then let's see if there's other programs, either state or federal programs, that you can leverage your incentives to make this deal even better for the project. And lastly, if you're going to do incentives, work with your attorney and come up with a non-threatening performance and accountability agreement, meaning we will commit to help you with this waiver or this cash grant based on number of jobs, whatever your incentive is, but in return, it's contingent on you doing this many jobs at this wage if you want to, or doing this much investment within a certain time frame. And really, the accountability agreement says that if they don't do 70 to 80% of what they promised to do, then you would have the right to require repayment of some or all of your incentives. So do you need a plan? And I'm going to show you an example in a slide or two. And we suggest that, if your development authority director, your Main Street director, whoever your exec is your point of contact, and it's working to try to help an existing company expand, an existing small business grow, or working with a new company, you want to be consistent and you want to be fair for new or existing small businesses. And so you need a strategy that's written and approved by your city. You want your city understanding how you're going to use the incentives that are available to you. And that way, if you make an offer, you won't have your leadership coming back and saying, you know, getting ugly in the front page about, hey, we didn't agree with that. You know, well, you did agree with it because you approved this approach. Now, if it's outside, if you need to do more than what's been approved, then you would just have to go back and seek approval for that. I know some of you have a constitutional authority, and legally you may not be required to do that, but I would tell you, if you want your board members reappointed, you're going to need to work with your city, and especially if you're abating school taxes or asking the county to abate county taxes to land a project, you're going to need their input and buy-in with whatever strategy you want to use. So how do we measure if you're going to get a return or if your incentives are prudent? Well, we have several models. One was developed by Georgia Tech. It's kind of the gold standard. It's called LOCI. But we've got something that's a little simpler that we use sometimes at Georgia Power when appropriate. And it's called fiscal impact analysis. And what we do is we look at the net new revenues expected from the business based on jobs and investment and any new households created. But we take away the cost of the incentives, the cost for new government services, the cost for education, and we come up with a net present value. And if you offer too much or spend too much to land a project, it can result in a negative fiscal impact or negative net present value. Now, I will tell you, sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. You know, if it's something that's going to lead to more growth down the road, if it's really critical to revitalizing an entire area in your town, you know, you may want to have a loss leader and for this first project go a little bit above and beyond what's break even. But we can help you determine what that number is, what those numbers are. It's not the same. The fiscal impact analysis is jurisdictional in nature, meaning that it only applies, we look at budgets and we look at net new revenues less net new costs just for the city, or we do it just for the county and the school board. It doesn't look at a region. You know, if we're looking at overall regional impacts, a lot of times we use something called an economic impact study, economic impact analysis. You hear, you know, when the Super Bowl comes to Atlanta, you'll see somewhere the economic impact was, and it'll be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And we joke about it a little bit because when you take an economic impact analysis, and there's several universities will do these studies for you. There's several of, we can do it at Georgia Power. There's several of these tools available, and it's really a black box, but you're going to take one big positive number and add two more smaller positive numbers to it. And so the result is always positive. It doesn't consider any new cost involved with landing the project. So it's always positive, but the takeaway is just remember that your fiscal impacts can be negative if you have to spend too much to close the deal. So this is just another, same thing I've covered on the previous slide. Benefits from property, new sales taxes from payroll, plus property taxes from new households or other contributions they make from using libraries, courts, recreation, whatever. We looked at all the new revenues minus all the costs for incentives, government services, and education. And we come up with either a gain or a loss. So this example, what you're looking at here is an actual plan or guideline on one county and how they're going to do tax abatements. This is only looking at the tax abatement incentive. Remember, there's a lot of other incentives they can offer, but this is their strategy only for how they're going to use tax abatements. And what this says is we're going to take a three-tiered approach. And the first tier is the company has to create at least 15 jobs and at least 10 million in capital investment. And if they meet those thresholds, we would offer 35% tax savings over 5 years. And if it's a larger project, we're going to offer more in tax savings. And so the example, the way they do it for tier 2 is if the project creates 50 jobs or more and up to 10 million in investment, or if they create 30 million in investment and 15 jobs or more, then they would qualify for 50-50, you know, it'd be balanced. It'd be 50% savings, they pay 50% in payments in lieu of taxes over a 10-year schedule. And then a third tier, you've got to do 100 jobs and 30 million in investment, or 50 million or more in investment and 50 jobs, and they would go up to a 65% tax savings and possibly a longer schedule than 10 years. Now you can do this kind of template or have a guideline that's approved by your leadership for a variety of those incentives that we've covered. You know, you can look at the value of the building. In other words, we could run some scenarios for you and say, we know this building's value is, you know, $400,000. If we wanted to structure reduced rent and it was going to lose X over 5 years because we weren't being made whole on the rent from the existing structure or improvements you needed to do, we could tell you how to structure a deal so that you could get repaid over what time horizon, and then you'd have to raise the rents in future years to be made whole on your investment. So, any questions so far?
Jim, we have one question, and it's mainly, basically, they wanted you, if you can, to link them with the tiered municipal rates or the economic development riders. We have a private water and sewer authority with one commercial flat rate. A lot of people want to know that. So when you have a chance to address that, but thank you for asking.
Yeah, and you know, that's you know, my first response would be, we can look at it on an individual community basis, but it's really, I can go through financial reports or show them in aggregate what revenues are generated from enterprise services and what those costs are. But without contacting other cities directly, it's really hard to see what the actual rate structure looks like. Much of it's posted. You know, you can go to for residential and commercial, but for industrial rates, it's kind of hard to figure out sometimes. We've tried to do that type of analysis to say, hey, for a city over X generating this amount of revenue from natural gas services, you know, your common or benchmark rate would be this much per decatherm. And it's really, we just haven't been able to do it solidly. And when we do those, when we worked with this one city to land the project, the way we did it is we knew the other two finalist communities, and they were in other states, and we simply were able to go to their websites and see what their industrial rates were. But that's not always the case, especially if you've got private providers involved that aren't regulated.
Thank you, Jim. And we'll share you with the 2 names of folks that requested that, and then you can get back in touch with them.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And I probably need to explain the economic development rider approach just very briefly, but really all that does is you would work with your city. Let's say, this isn't really going to help a small business, but if you had somebody in your city that was a relatively large water and sewer user or large natural gas user, and large, we can define that, but you would put a rider in place where you would reduce their normal rate just for a brief period of time, defer it for one, you know, have it offer the reduced rate for 1 to 2 years, and it would be tied directly to job creation. That's how we've always seen those structured prudently. So and usually it's a fair and large number of jobs, like 15 or more, before you can really have one of those economic development riders that makes sense. But yeah, I'll follow up as needed on that. So I'm going to talk about a few things outside the scope of just incentives that I hope you're thinking about. And then I want to tell you about something we're going to try to get started or restarted at Georgia Power. So, you know, I would encourage you, especially, we help a lot of communities with what we call a community assessment. And it's everything from looking at their workforce, the types of industries and jobs that they have in place now, the programs that both their colleges and career academies or technical colleges are offering in the area? Are we producing graduates that meet the existing industry's workforce needs? Or do we need to do a better job with what we're putting out that meets the demands of the workforce currently? But what do you want the workforce to look like a few years from now? Look at your website. You know, do you have testimonials about how great you, the authority, is to work with, or how great your leadership is, or boy, they're responsive to our needs? You know, talk about your successes. You know, are you are you keeping it up to date? I like to say it's really a process. Just because you hired some consultant and hired an IT firm and you did this big rework 1 to 2 years ago, that's just an event. I mean, you have to make changes continually. It's your website design and your website updating is a process that goes on and on and on. I'm going to show you something quickly called a retail leakage report. I think I've got enough time. Let me, well, I thought I could do this. Try one more time. Yes. Okay. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. All right. So selectgeorgia.com. So you can, this is a public site. Anybody can access this. You guys can go to property search. This will take just a little while to load. And you can go to create demographic reports over here on the left. And I'm just going to pick a city. Somebody tell me one. Tell me one over 5,000 in population.
Someone said Centerville, Adel.
Adel may work. Let's see. All right, we're going to go Adel in my neck of the woods, Cook County. And we're going to go to retail marketplace profile. And this is what I call a retail sales and surplus leakage report. And I always find these kind of interesting. They're not perfect, but it's a tool, it's a starting point for you in your conversation on what you're missing out on. Now, in my left-handed brain, which obviously is backwards, this report always is a challenge to me. But the first thing to remember is red is good. Red is good. Green is not good. Green is, I won't say bad, but green is where you want to focus. Because what it's saying is that in the city of Adel, total retail sales is about $145 million annually, and that they are drawing in, they're on the interstate, they are drawing in spending from other communities, and they have a surplus. But what they're missing out on, and this will be no surprise to folks in Adel, is that clothing, meaning people are going outside Adel to purchase clothes, shoes, jewelry, luggage. Again, not really any surprise. The green is where you would focus other general merchandise stores. So you can kind of see where you have a surplus, which is red, and where you have a leakage, which is green. And so this would help you as you're targeting, hey, what's missing? And then who is in that space that we can maybe recruit to a city like ours. But that report's available to you, just no charge. And if you have questions, or reach out to me or whoever your community development manager is. I'm going to show you a link and a map at the end on who you can contact, but feel free to contact me as well if you ever want to access that type of report. There's other demographics that are available to you as well. I encourage you to look at those. All right, so I hope I'm back up with the presentation. Let's,
You are.
Okay, you're good.
go ahead. Did I have a question, guys?
No, you're good. We can see
Okay.
the presentation.
Okay. Okay, good. So, oops. So I would, you know, the other thing I want to point out, and this really depends on where you are, and I get that. You know, in some of my communities, I got a lot bigger challenges in housing, but I know some of you have a housing challenge in some ways at least. And we have started working with communities. We're working with one city up in North Georgia who, I mean, their issue really is teachers, public servants, you know, people in that 50,000 or a little bit more starting income range. The example that we heard specifically from both superintendents was that, you know, we can get new teachers to come to our community, but they don't have a place to live, so they go live next door where there's affordable housing. And after driving, you know, 30 plus miles to teach each and every day, after 1 or 2 years experience, they immediately get a job in the neighboring county school system because they can avoid that commute. And both communities have great school systems. And so they have a housing supply shortage, and the leadership there, both at the city, county, and school board level, they realize they want to do some incentives to attract developers to provide some multifamily options and some other affordable housing options within the city or the county in this case. And they've targeted certain sites where they can make infrastructure improvements and not pass those costs along to developers. They haven't been successful yet, but they're trying to fully look at, you know, multifamily, you get kind of close to breaking even on the household formation compared to the government services that they require. It's like single family, you're really not going to break even on those, but with multifamily, they can get pretty close to breaking even. So they're trying to look at ways to incentivize development so that they can retain a lot of the teachers and public service folks, police, firemen, and all that they're losing because of their housing supply shortage. And lastly, I would be remiss, I'm going to talk on the next slide about ways to, you know, all these incentives are great, but you got to have a way to pay for them. You know, you got to have a way to fund them. Just like a number of you said you had a facade or building improvement grant program. You know, you can't do that unless you got funds to match those investment dollars with. And so where do you get the money? A lot of your leadership recognizes you need to make change, and they may give you an appropriation. And that's okay. Some of you may use SPLOST, a special purpose local option sales tax, geared toward economic development, something very broad. And you can use those sales tax dollars to establish that type of fund. But you want to continue to invest. And this is just another example. These are some of the cities. We don't have that many out of 500 plus cities. We probably got 25 or so total that use a mill, a part of a mill, or more than one mill to fund their city authority, their city downtown authority, downtown development authority efforts. And I just point out a couple of things here. If you're a statutory authority, legally, your city can levy up to 3 mills. That's the max you can go to fund your city economic development efforts. Now, on this chart, you say, well, Jim, LaGrange is doing 4 mills, Waycross is doing 6, West Point and Valdosta are doing 5. Well, they all are constitutional authorities and they can go above that 3 mill cap. And the other takeaway here is that, you know, 1 mill is not the same in every city. It really is driven, the value of the millage levy to create or help with your economic development success is based on the tax base. And so you see 1 mill in Athens is generating $328,000 a year for the Downtown Development Authority, whereas, you know, 6 mills in Waycross is only generating 100 grand. So, you know, you just need to figure out what your needs are, work with your leadership on what's our plan for the next 10 years. If it's easy to calculate what 1 mill or part of a mill would generate, if your tax base stays pretty stable year in and year out, and you would say, well, we want to fund these long-term streetscape improvements, infrastructure improvements, lighting improvements, parking solutions, road improvements, you know, it's a pretty good way to fund it. So if I'm sitting here saying it's a pretty good way to fund long-term capital improvements, why don't more cities do it? Well, because it's a tax increase. You know, unless your city's in a great place and you're generating spending from outside and you've got a surplus of sales tax dollars and your city can lower millage rates, and then really instead of lowering the mill, pass along that mill that they were going to reduce by to your Downtown Development Authority, and in net you keep rates the same, millage rates the same. It's just difficult to politically put in place sometimes. So I've got one more. Well, I don't have, I sent Stephanie the presentation. I don't know why I don't have the map here, but it's a statewide map and you can look at the map or go to Select Georgia to the website and you will see who your community development manager is, and reach out to them if you have any questions, or feel free to reach out to me. I'm glad to help and answer any questions we can. The other thing I want to mention to all of you on the call and to Cindy and our partners, Stephanie and Chris, you'll probably get a survey from us, from Georgia Power. We're a few weeks away, but you'll get a survey and we're just going to ask some needs, some technical, some practical, some resource needs, and then ask you about some things that are working and you're doing well with your downtown. And we're asking you to spend just a few minutes and give us your feedback to those questions in the survey, because we want to invest more to help you succeed. And we're looking at, you know, do we need a more of a formal program working with Georgia Cities Foundation, or working with GMA, working with Georgia Downtown Association, you know, and how can we help you guys be more successful? I mean, that's what it's all about. So be on the lookout for the survey, and I welcome any questions now. How'd we do, team?
That was great information, Jim. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, throw those in the chat right now, and we can get those answered. We've got a couple more minutes. This is recorded, so we'll be providing this on the Georgia Cities Foundation website, as well as the PowerPoint will be available on the website as well.
The recording's got to be scary. I'd hate to look at myself doing that. But I do appreciate everyone's interest and participation today. Thank you for what you do every day for your town and for your city.
We do have a few.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Jim, first question, Towns County is located in TVA. Do we still have a representative for our area from Georgia County?
Yes, you do. I will admit to you that we're probably not as good a resource for you as TVA, but Elise Davis is, what county is it or city is it?
Towns County.
Well, I don't know my North Georgia geography as well. That's either going to be Rope or Elise, but yeah, you do have a point of contact. You definitely do.
That's Hiawassee and Young Harris.
Yeah, that's going to be Rope then. Yeah, yeah. And Rope Roberts has been around longer than I have. He's a great resource for you. Are there tools to help figure out the public benefit as it relates to inducements? Yes, this is from Brian. And the tool that we use, we either use that Georgia Tech loci model, or I have a little bit of a simpler return on incentives model. And that's that net present value, it is the public benefit. That's what I was referring to when we calculate the net. We look at all the benefits less all the costs for service delivery, and if you have a city school system, less education, and we come up with that net public benefit.
Great. If there are no other questions, I want to thank Jim for coming out and doing a fantastic presentation. Like I said, we get a lot of questions about incentivizing deals, and Jim, thanks so much for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. Thank you all for attending the development sessions. Our next session will be on June 12th, and we will be talking about enhancing economic development through transportation projects. It's going to be really fun. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you at the next development sessions.